There's no new episode of our Masterpiece Studio podcast this week, but as PBS rebroadcast Masterpiece's 2018 production of Little Women, we thought we'd revisit our conversation with the late Dame Angela Lansbury, who played the proud and prickly Aunt March. Dame Angela's storied career was vast, appearing on our screens for over 75 years, and her love for her craft came through in all the roles that she played.
Nothing you do as an actor is wasted, you know. But I knew that what I was being used for was as a utility and as a character actress. So I was not the sort of glamorous type of young woman of those days, which was required if you were going to be built as a star.
Dame Angela died in October 2022, and it's not an understatement to say that she was a bucket list interview for me. A giant in the entertainment community, with credits that span from Gaslight, Mame, and Murder, She Wrote, to Beauty and the Beast and Little Women, one of her final credits, Dame Angela's characters were as iconic and memorable as the actor herself. Across my career, I've interviewed thousands of people, but I will never forget the hour I spent sitting with Dame Angela in the studio as she recounted stories about the start of World War II in Britain, her days as an underage touring cabaret singer, and so much more. At 92, she was as sharp as a tack, sly, honest and open, and just as remarkable as you might expect. I'm Jace Lacob, and you're listening to Masterpiece Studio. The legendary Dame Angela Lansbury needs no introduction. A prodigious triple threat with a career lasting more than 7 decades, Lansbury has graced our cinemas, television screens, and stages with her unmistakable presence since 1944.
The most foolish thing your mother ever did was to marry my nephew. He had filled his skull with theologizing and philosophizing and didn't leave space for a grain of business acumen.
So it is with great pride and immense pleasure that we welcome Lansbury to the Masterpiece screen for the very first time in the upcoming adaptation of Louisa May Alcott's beloved novel, Little Women. Lansbury's role is, of course, the prickly, proud Aunt March.
When you send me a written appeal for aid, the least you can do is to await me in the parlor and without an apron on.
From Gaslight to Mame to Murder, She Wrote, Lansbury joins us in a lively and no-holds-barred conversation. And this week we are joined by Dame Angela Lansbury. Welcome.
Thank you.
You've hinted that Little Women will be your last television role. What attracted you to this project specifically?
Little Women is a classic story and worldwide. You know, it's one of those wonderful pieces of literature that young people, old people, anybody who's ever had the fun of reading the book or seeing the various movies that have been made of Little Women have always been kind of touched and enraptured by it. And for that reason, I think it's a lovely thing to participate in, certainly for me at this time in my life.
Is it true, given the career that you've had, that Little Women marks the first time you've worked with a female director?
No, that is correct. That was an interesting experience for me and a first, and I'm so glad I had it. It was a very intimate relationship with a director, which I had never really encountered before. She was quite wonderful in her ability to come to us actors, not in a loud way from a distance. She would come and whisper in our ears. And in that way, she was able to impart very subtle things that otherwise, perhaps as a woman, she might not have wanted for everybody to hear. But for the actor to hear, it was delightful, and I loved working that way with her.
I love that sense of the intimate that she brought to that. That's incredible. I would think, most male directors tend to be sort of more of the shouty variety.
That's absolutely true. And I've worked with some of the loudest, shoutiest directors, believe me, down the road.
Now, what is your take on the peppery Aunt March? What makes her tick?
I think she's one of those women of her time. who, because of her position in life, the money, her house, the kind of attributes that women of a certain age had in those days. She went over the bridge a little bit, I think, and was a tough old broad. But nevertheless, I felt always that there was a spark of humor in everything that she did. And even though she was an old bee, as we say, nevertheless, there was something that you had to kind of admire her for. She lived life her own way.
Why don't you just open a little wider and swallow the whole book?
Sorry, Aunt March.
When I engaged you as my companion, Josephine, it was my hope that you would come to find Mr. Belshon's sermons as transporting and as restorative as I.
How familiar were you with Louisa May Alcott's novel?
Really not particularly aware of it, because having been born and brought up in England until I was 14 years old, I actually had not read Little Women. In fact, to this day, until I did this film, had I read it, I had seen little bits and pieces of the two films that were made in the 1930s, 40s, but I was so busy doing other things, I didn't really, I wasn't a good audience, shall we say, for it at that time in my life.
Well, I think it is sort of a quintessentially American novel, beloved though it is around the world, that I would think growing up in England it wasn't a book that you would necessarily gravitate towards.
No, we were reading A.A. Milne, you know, and those lovely writers for children of those 1920s, 30s, and so on. And that was what I was brought up reading, those books. And I wasn't reading Little Women. And so I was a newcomer to the whole concept, really. And so it was an interesting project for me to play in this film for that reason.
Aunt March is pretty stern or rigid with her own family. Is it that she perhaps belongs to another time, one where conventionality was prized so dearly?
Oh, certainly she comes from another period in time where a woman who, shall we say, had money, had position, and for her own reasons probably went through something in her younger life that made her the individual that she became. And, you know, there were a lot of women like that who had power because they had money and position. And they took advantage of it, particularly when they were dealing with members of their family who probably didn't, which in the case of the Little Women was certainly true. They didn't have anything. They were very dependent on her being there for them, but they had to give her time, and she demanded that they give her time, that they read to her or that they did errands for her. And they expected that. I think in those days, not today, but in those days, that was expected of the younger members of, in-laws and groups and so on.
Well, what ails the fool? Dysentery, typhus, apoplexy.
The telegram didn't say.
In which case it was indubitably written by a man.
Your mother was herself an actor. What made you interested in drama as a child?
It was thanks to my mother, who recognized in me an ability to cut up, to make believe, to run around being somebody other than the little girl that I was. It made her realize that I was a natural. And she, bless her heart, made the decisions for me in the very early years of my life. When I was 12, 13, I was going to drama school, you know. She started me off very young. Why? Because we were faced with the drama of World War II in our lives. The Germans were going to come and bomb London any minute, and it was a time that everybody's family had to adjust to the extraordinary circumstances of our lives. She started me going to drama school.
You mentioned the outbreak of World War II in 1939. You've described it as sort of exciting, wherein anything could happen. What do you remember of that first wartime day?
I remember the balloons. That's what I remember, oddly enough, were these balloons that they put up to keep the quotes, German planes from flying down low over the city of London where I lived. They couldn't come down, so they had to stay up high. But we could hear them, and to hear those planes going over London at that time was very, very frightening. I must say I remember that very distinctly.
And what do you remember of that first foray into acting? Once you got that scholarship, once you started at drama school, what was it like?
It was interesting to me because most of the young men at that time were going off to war, and there were not a great many young men. There were a tremendous amount of young women who were attending drama school in those days, and most of them were young society girls. They really weren't actors at all. I don't know why they decided they wanted to go to dramatic school, but it was almost like a finishing school to a lot of young women at that time. But I, on the other hand, was somebody who was going there to be trained to be an actor. So even though I was really very young, and it was a very formative time of my life, nevertheless, I realized that my ability to characterize, even in those days, I would get laughs, in other words, from my other gals and boys who were attending the school. And so it gave me a tremendous amount of confidence at that age, of course, because, as I say, I was only 13 and really quite young. But in those days, we grew up very fast because we had to, you know.
Your family escaped the Blitz to come to North America. Is it true the day you sailed from Liverpool, the city was bombed?
Yes, it was. It was. We heard that on the ship. The Duchess of Atholl was the name of the ship that we traveled on, which incidentally was sunk on its way back to Britain after it had let us off in Canada.
You landed your first theatrical job singing Noel Coward songs as part of a nightclub act at the Samovar Club in Montreal. Is it true you claimed to be 19 when you were actually 16 in order to get the gig?
Yes, I did have to do that. I had to try to fool everybody, and thank God I got away with it, because that was my entree, as we say in French Canada, to the theatre, in a sense, although here I was working in a nightclub. I always remember that I had wonderful people working with me on the same bill. I had a Yugoslavian singer, and I also had a Spanish couple who were Spanish dancers, and we all worked together, and we did the show every night, you know. And the Yugoslavian singer and I, we roomed together. I remember so well because she was a very attractive woman, quite a bit older than me, and she had a boyfriend, and she and I shared the bed in this rooming house, you know, and sometimes she would bring her boyfriend home, and I would have to wait until they were through with their liaison before I could go in and go to bed. These are the experiences you never forget.
Now, in Los Angeles, you settled with your family into a bungalow in Laurel Canyon. You and your mother both got jobs at Bullock's Wilshire department store. But before long, your mother was fired, and the family had to subsist on your wages of what was $28 a week. Did you feel that tremendous sense of burden being placed on you at the time?
Never. I never felt that. No, I must say, in all honesty, you know, the world was our oyster in those days. We were striving to get on our feet. I was striving to hopefully one day leave Bullock's Wilshire and go back to doing what I wanted to do, which was to act. And thank goodness, I had a very happy experience there, let me tell you. And in fact, I worked in the cosmetic department at one point, and the buyer suggested that I should become an assistant buyer. But I was so bad at math that I I was so badly educated, it's ridiculous. But nevertheless, education isn't everything. I got away from Bullock's Wilshire. It was a sad affair. I rather enjoyed it. But I got to go to MGM Studios, and from there, through this friend, I got to meet the great George Cukor, the director, who was looking desperately for a young actress to play the maid in Gaslight. And therefore, due to that wonderful happenstance of meeting George Cukor and the writers and the producers of Gaslight, I got my first chance to act, which is what I had really been preparing all of my life to do. I finally got to do it.
What is so amazing to me is Nancy Oliver, Gaslight. You're 17 years old. It's your first film. It's opposite Ingrid Bergman. What was this like as a 17-year-old filming this movie as your first role?
What was it like? I was completely awed by being in a major studio in Culver City, which was MGM in those days, which was, one of the number one big studios producing great movies with hundreds of great stars under contract. It was a very grand affair to be employed in a great studio like that in those days. And I was just nothing, I didn't have a proper dressing room. I had a funny kind of lean-to black place that I could change my clothes in and put my Nancy outfit on. And it was all so new to me that I didn't realize what I was really embarking on and what was going to become, thank goodness, finally, an interesting career in movies.
Now, you followed up Gaslight with roles in National Velvet and The Picture of Dorian Gray. What was it like making these two films so soon after your debut role?
I took it in my stride. Thank goodness I was able to adapt. I went from being Nancy in Gaslight to being the young girl in National Velvet with Elizabeth, and that was kind of going backwards. I was a little embarrassed playing a teenager, after playing Nancy, who was really a tough broad. So that was a bit of an adjustment. The Picture of Dorian Gray was so extraordinary and unique and quite a genuinely demanding role for me. And working with Albert Lewin, who was the great director in those days. Each one of those films were the best film work I ever did. After that, except for The Manchurian Candidate, which came way after, MGM just wasted my abilities as an actress for about 10 years. And I did it for the money because we needed it.
What was that experience like in terms of being underappreciated or underused?
Pretty darn difficult. Listen, I needed the income. I needed the experience. Nothing you do as an actor is wasted, But I knew that what I was being used for was as a utility and as a character actress. So I was not the sort of glamorous type of young woman of those days, which was required if you were going to be built as a star. I was a character actress, and I remained so all my life, I got to play some very glamorous women, but again, I was acting that part. I wasn't just a glamour girl. And the most successful young actresses at MGM in those days were, in the first place, they were just great-looking gals. They had great legs. They danced well. They sang. They did all the right stuff, and I just wasn't that. I always I was a sort of a meat and potatoes actress rather than just a glamour girl. The only time I think I showed my legs was in the Harvey Girls, and they made the most of it. Called me Legs Lansbury for a while.
In The Manchurian Candidate, you were only 3 years older than Lawrence Harvey, who played your son in the film. In Blue Hawaii, you played Elvis Presley's mother, despite only being 10 years older than him. Why was that a recurrent theme during your career?
I think it was due to my ability to characterize and to play older than myself and to take on the kind of overt attributes of older women. And that's part of acting, If you're a character actress, you know how to do that and to behave like somebody a good deal older than you are. So that wasn't extraordinary for me to do, and it was fun. I didn't mind doing that.
Before this next question, a brief word from our sponsors. Ocean voyages, expeditions, river journeys. Viking is dedicated to bringing travelers closer to the destination, offering a small ship experience and a shore excursion in every port. Learn more at Viking.com. Now, at age 40, you were cast in your first title role in a musical. How did Mame transform your career?
Mame, thanks to Jerry Herman, completely transformed my musical comedy career. In other words, going to Broadway, and being presented as Mame in a great show. If you think about it, it was a hit from the moment the curtain went up. It was so well put together, so well directed, and Jerry Herman believed in me totally because he'd seen me earlier in another musical that I had done, which was Anyone Can Whistle, which was the first sort of semi-successful show of Stephen Sondheim. And it was probably his first big musical. It was not a success, but it started me as a singing actress on stage in New York. And it ran for 9 performances. There are people in New York today who say, I saw you, in that show. We wonder how they managed all to get into the theater because... But anyway, as I say, 9 performances. And that was it.
Now, one of my favorite films of yours is Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which I loved growing up. Are you surprised that Hollywood hasn't remade that film yet?
Not really, although they probably will. But they still hold it out. And it's one of the shows that young kids today will sit down and watch and thoroughly enjoy. Why? Because it also involves other young people, children their age, doing things, being involved in magic and everything else under the sun, and they love it for that reason.
Now, is it true that when faced with 2 offers in 1983, one for comedy, the other for detective drama, your agents urged you to take the comedy?
Well, they didn't. I mean, the drama was the one I chose, in fact.
That detective drama, Murder, She Wrote, became an enormous global success and ran for 12 seasons, which is, especially today, almost unheard of. Did you think at the time when you signed on that this would prove to be such a huge commercial hit?
To be truthful, it never occurred to me that it would last such a long time. And it was only when I was able to become not only the main actress in the piece, but also to be a producer of it, that I became interested enough to make it the show that I wanted to do. When I first started, it really wasn't. I was playing a kind of a slightly kooky character, rather unreal, as it later turned out. But the later version of herself was my own invention, and that was the one I think that really carried me through for the 12 years that we did it.
And as the lead actor and a producer on it, how much of an influence did you have on the character of Jessica Fletcher and pushing that character out to where she became?
Oh, absolutely. I was responsible totally for that, yes. And as we worked together, various directors worked with me, and we made her so much more interesting, smart, intelligent, not kooky at all, really smack on, and a terrific woman. And this is what made her so attractive to men, which I've discovered as the years have gone by. Men liked Jessica. They didn't only think of her as a detective, they also liked her as a woman because she was absolutely smack on, fun, she had a sense of humor, but she was also smart as all get out and attractive. I made her attractive. You know, it's one thing to be a lady sleuth and look as if you're, constantly looking for clues. It's another thing to be very attractive, to wear great clothes, and to behave like a whole woman.
And you fought to keep her out of a relationship, is that correct?
Yes, I did, because it was important that she was out there and that she was available at all times.
Now, you previously said that the whole point of Murder, She Wrote was to celebrate the kind of active older women who didn't appear on TV but were everywhere in real life. Did Murder, She Wrote help to move the dial on that, as it were, or is the entertainment industry, do you feel, still just as youth-obsessed?
Unfortunately, I think the tendency is to stick with that. But I think the page is turning for women in the arts, and particularly in television. And women today in television are far more intelligent, attractive, yes, but not just the sex objects that they were for so many years. You know, they were either that, or they were the little woman, or they were the wife. In other words, now women have taken their place, and they are a very important part of society. Thank goodness. I think Jessica was ahead of her time in that respect. She was admired by men, and everybody, the police chief or whoever it was, because she was a real woman in every respect, plus being hopefully attractive, as well as having a good head for mystery, and certainly able to hold her place in society with the men that she had to deal with.
What was it like on that final day of shooting, saying goodbye to Jessica Fletcher?
That was a very tough day. It really was. My goodness. We did leave it on that last day. That was it. And listen, we all shed a tear.
Now, several generations of fans have fallen in love with Beauty and the Beast and with your performance as Mrs. Potts. Why do you think this film has cast such a spell with so many viewers of so many ages?
I think it's because Mrs. Potts was a warm, lovable mommy. She had her little guy, her little son, and she was just there, and loving being around the lovers, And when she sings Tale as Old as Time, there's something that you just can't resist her, because she's such a lovable little lady. And I think that's what everybody feels when they hear her sing and watch her, looking up to the little girl and the beast. She takes the place of everybody who loves the story. She's watching it all the time and part of it.
It's probably the only time anyone wants to hug a teapot. But you do. You want to hug a teapot there. What was it like recording the songs for that with the backing of the Philharmonic?
That was a glorious occasion, I have to say that. A recording Tale as Old as Time was one of those extraordinary times in your life where everything fell into place, everything worked. We got it on the first take. Would you believe it? And that was it. I never sang it again.
That's incredible. Just one time, and this song is now, I think, trapped in amber.
Probably, yeah. I think you're right, it is, and, I sing it all the time. I'm going to New York in a few weeks, and I'm going to sing it again, and with the composer, and we will bring it back to life again.
A 2007 New York Times profile of you said, quote, "Miss Lansbury calls herself a cabbage, dull but absorbent." What on earth did you mean by that exactly?
Well, in the first place, I don't think I ever said that. But you say that it was attributed to me, so I must have said something to that effect. What I really meant to say, I think, was that I was a sponge. And if you're a sponge, you soak up everything that's going on around you, which as an actress has been enormously helpful to me because I'm able to draw on things, and I don't quite know where I got certain information, but it's there, and I'm able to use it if I'm characterizing a certain person that I'm playing. And in many ways, it's a very good thing if you've got ears in the back of your head, eyes in the front of your face, and you absorb a tremendous amount about life, which you as an actress will use effectively in some instances, not so effectively in others. But nevertheless, you do gather a tremendous amount of knowledge about people, characters, characteristics, and knowledge of just about anything you set your mind to.
Looking back at a career such as yours, is there a favorite performance or a role of which you are incredibly proud?
In the theatre, I suppose Mame. That was the one that I played it for a long time. 2 years on Broadway. It seems I have the ability to reproduce a look, a sound, on an ongoing basis. I don't know what I can put it down to. It's very strange that, I was never off the stage. I was never sick. I was never any of those things that often will prevent an artist from remaining in a role. But I managed to do it for 2 years and then take it on the road, and come out to L.A., San Francisco, and so on. So it was a long, long investment in time. But I loved doing it because the audience responded so tremendously well and loved the character of Mame, as I did playing her. She was such fun to play, and also with a great cast, So I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. I also loved doing Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, which was a totally different demand as far as my abilities as an actress and as a singer to bring about. But anything that Stephen Sondheim is responsible for doing is always a challenge, and it was a great experience too.
Now, you worked with and became friends with Bette Davis on Death on the Nile. What did you make of the experience together and of your friendship with Bette?
She understood what I was about as an actress, and she recognized the fact that I hate to use this expression, but that I was the real thing. In other words, I wasn't just a kid, who became a successful movie star, but that I was an actress, just as she was. And she and I got along fine, She was a very interesting woman. She was very selfish in her latter years, which is understandable, my goodness. To maintain her position as a great actress which she earned. By gosh, she did she not? I mean, she was the best of her time, and I recognized that, and I felt for her because she was coming up to the end of her career, and it wasn't easy for her to be in a film with a whole bunch of new young artists who were very hot in those days, and certainly Death on the Nile had many young actresses who were very stylish and very talented, as it turned out. So I was more of her era, so we got along.
Now, at this point, you've been nominated for virtually every award under the sun. You've been nominated a staggering 18 times for Emmy Awards alone. I mean, what is your feeling about awards and recognition in general now?
There was a song I used to sing called "It's Great Not to Be Nominated, Great Not to Be Nominated." Isn't that funny? Anyway, I was nominated. I never got an Emmy. I never received an Emmy. But what made up for the fact was that I did receive a lot of awards on the theater in New York City, and that made up for everything. And I was nominated for Academy Awards and for Emmys, as I say, but never received one. But that's okay. That's the way it was in those days.
Now, you're playing the balloon lady in Disney's Mary Poppins Returns, which comes out later this year. What can you share about that production?
Well, it's the most lavish, beautiful, colorful, gorgeous production you'll probably see on the screen. Because we don't make movies like that anymore, but they really went to town with that show. It's going to be quite something to see. And I have a tiny part. I'm in at the end. I'm the balloon lady, but I get to sing the song. Mm-hmm. And Emily Blunt and I share a last moment at the end of the film, which is lovely. And she's going to be delightful in it. I haven't seen it yet, but I do believe will be perfect in that role.
You've been acting for nearly 75 years. To what do you ascribe your career longevity? Does it come down to one thing?
Talent. Pure and simple. God-given talent. And that's where it is. And I'm infinitely grateful to have had the opportunity and to do the things that I have in the theatre and films and in television. It's been a wonderful life.
Looking back at your career, is there anything you would have done differently? A decision you would have made?
Would I have done anything differently? No. I can't break it down and say, I wish I hadn't done such and so, or I made a mistake. I should have turned that down and never done it. No, I can't honestly say that would have been my regret. It's been a wonderful career in many, many ways, and I treasure. Most of it has been extraordinary, and life runs along concurrently with a career. There have been good days and not so good days in private life and so on, family troubles. But family now is just marvelous. My son and daughter and my grandchildren have all made my life is tiny compared to what they have meant to be.
And when you say the words Angela Lansbury, they're usually preceded by things like international treasure or living legend. Do you wear those mantles easily?
No, I don't really, because I'm really a very plain, ordinary person at heart. My grandfather was a great labor leader. I have a very large piece of him in me. I'm every woman. I'm all women in many respects, and that's the reason I've been able to become so many different women in my career. And that's been the wonder to me that I've managed to pull that off. I don't take any pride in it. It was a God-given talent.
And finally, what's next for you?
A good question. I'm not quite sure. I'm doing several things at the present time that are not big movies, doing some small things along the way. You may recognize my voice sometimes. I do a lot of voiceovers, and that's fun. I enjoy doing that. But nothing big. No more theater now for me. Television, we'll see.
Dame Angela Lansbury, thank you so very much.
It's been my great pleasure talking to you. Thank you for asking me all the right things.
This episode was originally produced by Nick Anderson. Next time on Masterpiece.
I literally start my new job in 54 minutes. How could you do this?
I'm really sorry. But like I said, love...
Don't call me love.
Season 5 of Unforgotten begins next week, September 3rd at 9 p.m. Eastern. Masterpiece Studio is hosted by me, Jay Slay-Cobb, produced by Jack Pombriant, and edited by Robin Bissett. Alicia Etup is our sound designer. The executive producer for Masterpiece is Suzanne Simpson.